In this video, we'll examine the new Selector widget that was introduced in Planning Analytics Workspace 2.0.89. The new Selector widget is not enabled by default in 2.0.89 and 90. So in order to enable it, we'll go to Administration, we'll go to Features, and then we'll confirm that the feature has been enabled in the Features page. Notice that we have an enablement release here, which is 92. This means that the feature will be enabled by default for everyone in 92, and it will no longer be able to disable the feature. This also means that any existing selector widgets, classic selector widgets, or list widgets will be updated to the new selector widget in 2.0.92. And a little bit later in the video, we'll take a look at what that actually looks like. But for now, let's go to Reports and Analysis, and we'll create a new book. In this book, we will pull a cube viewer from our planning sample database into the book. And then from the cube viewer, we'll drag one of the selector tiles onto the canvas, and we'll see that we get the new selector widget. Without this feature enabled, at this point, we'd see the classic selector widget. Now, this new selector widget, it has a lot of tricks that the old selector widget didn't have. First, and one of the most important tricks, is the ability to size both horizontally and vertically. The classic selector widget could only be resized horizontally. This caused alignment issues when you tried to align the widget to other books and the screen resolution changed. So now, as long as the book is responsive or we're using the fill space template, we can simply expect it to resize relative to any other widgets within the book. The other thing to point out here is that this selector widget is now a standard widget, which also has properties that are common with some other widgets. One of these properties is the ability to set a title on the widget. So if we enable the title, we can add a string here, and we can even format the string with the font of choice, color of choice, and we could say we want this centered, right? Now, in order to see all the content in the widget, we may need to make it a little bit larger at this point, but here we can see a title being added to the widget. We can also do things like change the border color of the widget, or add a fill color to the widget if we'd like. This gives us a lot more flexibility in the presentation of the widget. Now, let's say we wanted the widget to appear like this, but we don't want to show Plan Business Unit as the hierarchy for this selector. We can hide that. This is a new functionality or new property of the widget that's available through the Custom Properties panel. So here we can disable the header, right? And then we simply see my selector and the currently selected member. I'll also point out that when we look at the drop-down box here, this drop-down box is a little bit more in common with the drop-down box that we'd see in the cube viewer, right? So here we can see the option to access the set editor, or of course we could double click on this. We also see the overflow menu, which is new in the selector widget as well. And in the selector widget, we see some of the same options that we'd expect to see from the same thing, the selector tile in the cube viewer. We have other new capabilities available through the Custom Properties panel as well. So again, if we select the widget and go back to the Custom Properties, we can also see that we can enable and disable the icons. This works on the member that's being presented. It also appears in the drop-down list that we're looking at. If we want, we can disable this overflow menu. Keep in mind that this doesn't absolutely disable access to the set editor. We can still access the set editor from here or by double-clicking on the member. However, it is possible to completely disable access to the set editor. Again, through the custom properties in the properties panel, we have an option for set editor access. This is a feature that actually existed within the old selector widget as well. It just applies in a slightly different way in the new selector widget because the set editor is available in different ways. One thing to point out here is that we can disable access to the set editor, but we can leave the overflow menu enabled. If we do this in this widget, when we click on the overflow menu, we see no drop-down options. We see an empty box here, right? So if you are disabling access to the set editor, we'd recommend you also disable access to the overflow menu. What else can we do? Well, we have a search option here, but in this example, we only have a small number of members to pick from. So the search may not be that useful for us. If we want to remove the search option, we can simply disable it from the properties panel. And then when we look at the list, we can see that there's no search option. We can also get rid of the indentation. So if we want a flat list of members to appear for the user to select from, we can do that as well. This is actually starting to look a little bit like the old list widget from Planning Analytics Workspace 2.0.88 and lower. Now, if we want to also disable the expand and collapse options, that's also possible, at which point this dropdown will look like a pure list of flat members. Okay, let's re-enable a couple options here. And let's also just get rid of our title. One of the biggest tricks for this widget is that we can present it not just as a combo box dropdown, but also as a list, right? So I mentioned that the selector widget, the new selector widget, is going to replace both the old list widget and the old selector widget. We can do this by presenting the selector widget as a list, right? And again, all the same options apply here. If I don't want the user to access the set editor, we could disable access to the overflow menu. If we don't want the header to be displayed, we just want a list, we could do that as well. If we don't want the search option because there's only a limited number of members and users don't need to search, that can be disabled. And then we can also disable things like the icons, the indentation, and the expand and collapse. This presentation that we're looking at right now actually looks almost identical to the old list widget. However, the old list widget was only capable of presenting lists of members. If we want to present a list of members, of course we can still do that, and we can provide a bit more flavors, such as the indentation and the icons, which wasn't possible in the old list widget. But we can also do lists of other things as well. So if we want, we could enable, instead of members, sets and levels. And now we see a list of the different sets and different levels. Again, if we enable synchronization here, let's go ahead and do that. We'll see that this doesn't make a lot of sense in this particular case because, of course, our hierarchy that we're synchronizing with is on the slicing axis. But if we move this to the row axis of the view, we can see it makes a lot more sense to pick a particular subset here, and then to synchronize so we see the members in that subset, or levels. Now we also have a few more tricks. If we want to see just a list of levels, that's entirely possible now as well. Again, worth mentioning at this point that our previous list widget could only list members. It was not possible to list subsets or levels. Here we can do lists of members, lists of sets and levels, lists of just levels, so the user can pick between the different levels, or lists of sets. So here we can see the 4 subsets that exist within the hierarchy, and we can choose between them. Now there's a neat feature in Planning Analytics Workspace on the Q viewer to limit the list of sets that are being displayed for the user to select from. In the Q viewer, this is the Customize Sets feature. This feature also exists on the new Selector widget as well. In order to set this up, we'll need to enable access to the set editor and the overflow menu. And of course, because we're in list form at this point, we also need the header in order to see the overflow menu. So from here, we'll customize the list of sets, and then we'll provide an experience where the user can only pick between 2 of the 4 different sets. Of course, in reality, this is probably a little bit more useful when you have hundreds or thousands of sets and you want to build an experience where the user's only picking between a few of those sets. So we'll apply this, and then we'll go ahead, we'll disable the overflow menu again so the user can't access the set editor. And you can see we have an experience now where the user can only pick between 2 different sets. I'm going to show you one more trick we can do with the set editor and the members being displayed in either a list widget, list presentation of this widget, or the combo box widget. This will work for both. Now, in this case, we're going to go into the set editor. So we'll enable access to the overflow menu. Again, we'll go to the set editor, and then we'll just pick only the consolidations from the hierarchy. So we'll pick the 3 consolidations, we'll hit replace. That's what's going to show up. Now, if we take the book out of edit mode, we'll notice as the end user working on the book, they have the ability to expand Europe and pick members below Europe. Or North America, they could expand and they could pick Canada or the US. But what if we wanted to build an experience where the user could only pick from one of the consolidations? Well, this is possible, right? So again, we'll select the widget, we'll go to properties, and through here, we will disable access to the expand and collapse options, and also to indentation as well. Or we could leave indentation enabled if we wanted. But the trick here is that with the expand and collapse disabled, the user has no ability to actually expand and collapse the members. So it doesn't just get rid of the icon, it actually prevents users from expanding and collapsing. So now when we take the book out of edit mode, we'll notice that the user can expand, or they can select total business unit, they can select Europe, they can select North America. Note that when we synchronize this, through the selection of a consolidation, we also show the children below the consolidation on the widget that's being synchronized. This is a long-standing behavior of our synchronization capability. But it gives us an experience where through the use of the selector widget, the user can only pick a consolidation and it can't pick a leaf member or any member that's a child of the consolidations that are being presented. So again, this is just another flexible option. One more thing that wasn't possible with the old selector widget. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll go back to administration and we'll actually disable the old selector widget. In order for this to take effect, we're going to sign out and then we'll log back in. And then we'll take a look at a book that I previously created that has the old list widget and the old selector widget. So here we can see the old selector widget. Again, notice that there's some differences between the presentation of the members and the drop-down when we're looking at the Q viewer, right? We can see the icons here and the set editor option here. There's no icons over here. But then also notice that we're not able to resize this vertically, it's only horizontally. And again, this caused plenty of problems when we're trying to keep widgets aligned and workspace content is created on one system and then being viewed on a system with a completely different resolution. Also notice our old list widget here. This old list widget, again, we weren't able to show things like icons. We weren't able to show different options of the widget. We could simply see the members in a flat list, right? We weren't able to do levels or sets within here. Now let's go over to administration one more time. And then we'll go to features. We'll re-enable this feature. And again, keep in mind, this is going to fall off in 92. 92 should be the last release where we see this option to enable this and test this out. And again, just so this takes effect quickly, we'll log out. We'll log back in. We'll go to our same book with the classic sync widget and the classic list widget. And here we can see that they've been updated, right? Notice that we try and keep the presentation of the old widgets. So the list widget, when it's being updated, is presented with some of the features disabled, right? So if we look at the properties here, we can see that the icons are disabled, the headers disabled, the overflow menu is disabled, same with search, expand and collapse, and indentation, simply because this is what it looks closest to the old list widget presentation. For the new selector widget, notice that the overflow menu isn't disabled by default, so we do hide it because it just simply didn't exist in the old list widget, but we keep all the other options the same. So it's not exactly alike, but the intent is to keep the look and feel of these widgets fairly similar on upgrade, and then of course they can always be updated or modified after the upgrade has completed to the version of Workspace where the new selector widget has been enabled. So with that, that's been a quick overview of the new selector widget and the upgrade path from the old selector widget and the old list widget to the new selector widget.